Hello everyone, my name is Sam. Today I'm going to talk about submerged prehistory in the Solent as part of the MAT's Winter Talk series on maritime archaeology in the Solent. I'm going to start by talking about the paleolandscape of the Solent and how the geography of the area looked like in prehistory. Then I'm going to focus on a specific submerged prehistoric site as a case study. This is Bouldnor Cliff, one of the most important underwater Mesolithic sites in the whole UK and Europe as well. I will focus on its discovery, history of investigation, and the main results obtained from excavation at the site. This will help demonstrate the archaeological importance of the site, but also it will allow to paint a picture of prehistoric life in a now lost landscape. Now, many of you will recognize this picture as you're all probably familiar with how the Solent and the Hampshire and Isle of Wight coast looks like today. And you can also see the location of Bouldnor Cliff being pinned on the satellite map. But in the past, the region would have looked completely different. For example, this is the situation 10,000 years ago, at the start of the Mesolithic, when sea level was about 35 meters lower. This is a hypothetical reconstruction, but we can still observe some quite interesting features. Britain is still linked to mainland Europe, as is the Isle of Wight with Hampshire, and various river systems can be seen draining towards the south. One in particular is the Solent Paleo River, which you can see here. These changes have occurred because sea level dropped about 120 meters during the last glaciation, more or less 20,000 years ago. But since then, sea level has been rising until reaching the modern level. This means that not only the landscape we see and know today would have been completely different, but also that humans would have walked, inhabited, and experienced these now submerged places, as well as witnessing some of the changes occurring. Now, if we take the Western Solent, we would have a perfect example of the scale of these changes. In 6500 BC, so the first picture to your left, sea level would have been circa 12 meters lower, which means that a lake could have existed in the still dry Western Solent with an outlet, namely the River Yar, linking this body of water to the sea, which had now reached the southern coast of the Isle of Wight. This would have corresponded to the Mesolithic period, although before Bouldnor Cliff was occupied. In 4500 BC, instead, so the second picture, sea level would have been circa 5 meters lower, causing the eastern Solent River to be connected to the western Solent Lake. This would have corresponded to the end of the Mesolithic and the start of the Neolithic in Britain, so after Bouldnor Cliff was occupied. Finally, in 1500 BC, so the third picture to your right, sea level would have been circa 2.5 meters lower, meaning that the coastline was starting to take its modern shape. The Hurst Channel is finally breached, causing the disappearance of the western Solent Lake, while the southern mouth of the River Yar becomes blocked, causing the river to flow to the north. This fairly modern asset, however, was only reached during the Bronze Age, which is quite late in prehistory. Nevertheless, the Solent is still changing to this day, and we can clearly see how coastal erosion affects the modern coastline by looking at the mudflat regression near Lymington. This has strong implications for archaeology, which is threatened and exposed by these processes. There are in fact multiple layers of preserved prehistoric landscapes in the Solent. Some are deeper, including the Mesolithic material at Bouldnor Cliff, while others are shallower, for example, the later pits across the Solent at Lymington and further along the New Forest coast. And because of these exposure processes, in the 1980s, fishermen dredging for oysters started to notice the presence of prehistoric flints in their catch, which attracted the attention of archaeologists like David Tomalin, who you can see in the picture here. Thus, in the 1990s, underwater archaeological investigations of the area started, especially around Lymington, leading to the discovery of more stone artifacts as well as pit deposits and fossilized tree remains, namely the evidence of a lost landscape with humans in it. And it was in this way that in 1998, during a routine survey, divers noticed some worked flints inside the lobster burrow, and thus the archaeological site of Bouldnor Cliff was discovered. Although we have to remember that the area was known since the 1980s for its preserved forest and associated peat deposits, which were being investigated for an environmental analysis as part of an EU project related to archaeology and coastal change. In the early years, one of the 5 localities of the site was particularly studied. This is Bouldnor Cliff 2, where numerous stone tools were discovered eroding from an ancient sandbar, which has been dated to around 6000 BC. But it is safe to say that the most interesting evidence from Bouldnor Cliff came from another locality, Bouldnor Cliff 5, always dated the same period but yielding many pieces of worked wood, including wooden platforms and timbers, whose cut marks suggest they might have been used for building log boats. This is particularly significant because it helps us paint a picture in which people at the site were not just hunting, gathering, and fishing, but they were also moving around a drowning landscape using maritime technology. This might have been used for traveling and exchanges with different groups, a hypothesis that might explain the presence of wheat in cetadNA samples from the site, as this crop only reached the British Islands in the Neolithic, so almost 2000 years later, and thus it could only have come from southern Europe, where farming started to be practiced earlier. Now the next slide will show a 3D model of the whole Bouldnor Cliff 5 site. Here are some examples of the wooden material recovered at the site, including a timber with cut marks. Moreover, in order to put the site into its environmental context, cores were taken at various points at the site. These cut through the sediment, showing the stratigraphy of the site while also allowing archaeologists to analyze these layers. This information, together with radiocarbon dates, pollen samples, and micro and macro fossils, can allow us to reconstruct the environment at the site. The vegetation was characterized by mixed woodland, including trees like oak, hazel, elm, pine, alder, lime, and willow in the wet areas. At first, the site would have been located on a sandy river bar, in which freshwater riverside conditions prevailed. Then, as sea level rose, a reed swamp started to develop. After just 200 years of rapid sea level rise, the site was already inundated and a salt marsh developed, while alder also started to characterize the area. Thus, these rapid changes explain why the site was only occupied for a brief 200 years period, as it was very rapidly drowned by the sea and humans had to move away from it. So, in conclusion, we have now built a nice picture of how life at Bouldnor Cliff in the Solent paleo landscape would have looked like. Flint knapping, organic materials processing, woodworking, and possibly maritime activities would have all taken place at the site, meaning that we can interpret Bouldnor Cliff as a seasonal camp on an unstable river bar, occupied only shortly before its inundation. Nevertheless, these amazing results would have not been possible without the astonishing preservation of the underwater deposits of the Solent, which conserved precious artifacts for thousands of years. This demonstrates the importance of maritime archaeology also to uncover the oldest evidence of our past. Thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed this talk and the fascinating lost world hidden beneath the Solent. If you want to know more about the story of Bouldnor Cliff, check out the MIT page on the site to access more information, including some more 3D models of the archaeology recovered. And finally, here are the references I have used for this video.